Nobody believed an old man could ruin their perfect little picnic until I did. My wife's gone. Been gone 3 years now. My knees hurt every damn morning, and I sold the house. That house where we raised our kids, where she took her last breath in my arms. I sold it all to move back to the river where my father taught me to fish when I was 6 years old. I only wanted quiet. I wanted to hear the water again. I wanted to remember what peace felt like before the cancer took her. Didn't expect a committee of strangers to come for my land. Didn't expect a war. Let me tell you who I am because it matters. My name's not important, but my life is. I'm 75 years old. I served this country in the early 70s in Vietnam, came back with shrapnel in my leg and nightmares that took a decade to quiet down. Met my Sarah in 1973 at a county fair. She was wearing a yellow dress and had mud on her boots from walking through the parking lot. I knew right then I'd marry her. We had 48 years together. 48 years of her laugh, her terrible cooking that got better over time, her hand in mine while we watched our grandkids grow up. She got sick in 2021, pancreatic cancer. They gave her 6 months. She fought for 18. I was there every single day, every single night, watching the strongest woman I ever knew get smaller and smaller in that hospital bed. When she died in early 2023, something in me died too. And the house became a tomb. Every corner had her ghost. Our bedroom, the kitchen where she'd hum while making coffee, the porch where we'd sit and watch the sunset. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't breathe there. So I took what money we had left, the life insurance, the savings we'd been hoarding for a retirement we'd never get to share, and I went looking for the only place that still felt like home, the river, the same stretch of river where my grandfather had a fishing camp back in the 50s, where my father taught me to cast a line, where I proposed to Sarah under a willow tree in 1974, a tree that's probably still standing somewhere along that bank. I found a property, 3 acres, right on the water, old cabin that needed work, a dock that was half rotted, but it was perfect. It was mine. I thought I could rebuild something there. Not my life. You don't rebuild after losing someone like Sarah, but maybe a little bit of peace. Maybe a place where I could sit on the porch and talk to her at night, tell her about the fish I caught, the sunsets she would have loved. I was wrong. I was so damn wrong about finding peace. I bought the place in early spring of 2024, March, a year after Sarah died, a year of living in that tomb of a house before I finally had the strength to leave. Cold mornings when I drove down that gravel road for the first time as the owner, not just some dreamer looking at a for sale sign. The truck groaned under the weight of everything I owned. Didn't own much anymore. Tools, clothes, a box of Sarah's things I couldn't leave behind. Her favorite coffee mug, the quilt her grandmother made, photos of us when we were young and stupid and so damn happy we didn't know what was coming. The cabin was worse than I remembered. Water damage in the corner. Mice had made it their kingdom. The windows were so dirty you could barely see the river through them. But I didn't care. I got to work. That's what you do when you're old and broken and you need something to live for. You work. You fix things. You hammer nails until your hands hurt so bad you can't think about anything else. I spent the first week just cleaning, sweeping out mouse droppings, scrubbing floors, patching holes in the walls. I set up my cot in the corner, hung a lantern on a nail, and made coffee. Every morning on an old wood stove I got working again. The coffee tasted like smoke and rust, but it was the best coffee I'd had in years because I made it there, in that place, with the sound of the river just outside the door. I fixed the dock, replaced the boards that had rotted through. It took me 4 days because my knees don't bend like they used to and my back goes out if I work too long. But I did it. I sat on that dock the first night it was finished, dangling my feet over the edge like a kid, and I told Sarah about it. Out loud. I know she couldn't hear me, but I told her anyway. I told her I did it. I told her I found us a place. The next morning, I did something I'd been carrying with me since the funeral. I took the small wooden box, the one that held what was left of her, and I walked down to the end of the dock. The sun was just coming up, turning the water gold and pink, the kind of sunrise she would have made me stop everything to watch. I opened that box and let her ashes go into the river. Watched them swirl and drift and become part of the current, part of this place. "You're home now," I said. "We're both home." Those first 2 weeks were the most peaceful 2 weeks I'd had since she died. I'd wake up with the sun, fish in the morning, work on the cabin during the day, sit on the porch at night with a beer, and watch the stars. Nobody bothered me. No neighbors, no noise, just me and the water and the memory of her. And then they showed up. Her name was Diane Pritchard. I'll never forget that name as long as I live. She came walking up my driveway on a Tuesday morning, third week I'd been there. I was replacing a section of the porch railing. Had splinters in my fingers and sweat on my neck, even though it was only 60 degrees out. I heard her car first. One of those little luxury SUVs that cost more than I made in a year back when I was working. She parked it right behind my truck, blocking me in like she owned the place. She got out wearing white pants. White pants in the country. That should have been my first warning. She had perfectly styled hair, the kind that doesn't move in the wind, and she was carrying a wicker basket like she was Little Red Riding Hood coming to visit Grandma. She smiled at me, a big, bright, fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hello there. You must be the new owner. I'm Diane Pritchard, president of the Riverside Estates Homeowners Association. Welcome to the neighborhood." Neighborhood, that's what she called it. I looked around at my 3 acres of woods and water and saw no neighbors, no houses within sight, no estates. Just my cabin and the river and the trees. But I was polite. Sarah always said I was too polite for my own good. "Thank you, ma'am." Didn't know there was an association. Her smile got tighter. "Oh, yes. This entire area is part of Riverside Estates, has been for about 15 years now. We maintain the common areas, the boat launch, the nature trails. Is really quite wonderful. We have standards, of course. Keep everything beautiful." She handed me the basket. Inside was some kind of muffin wrapped in plastic, a bottle of what looked like fancy olive oil, and a pamphlet. A glossy pamphlet with photos of perfect lawns and perfect houses and perfect people who didn't look like they'd ever had a hard day in their lives. The title said Riverside Estates Community Guidelines and Covenants. "Just some light reading," she said, and she laughed. "Nothing too serious. Just want to make sure everyone's on the same page about maintaining property values. I'm sure you understand. I noticed you've been doing some work out here, which is wonderful, but we'll need you to submit any exterior modifications for architectural review before you proceed. Just a formality." I held that pamphlet in my hands and felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Ma'am, I bought this property outright. It's mine. Been in families around here for generations. I don't recall anything about an association in the deed." Her smile didn't waver. "Oh, I'm sure it's all in your paperwork. Sometimes these things get overlooked at closing. But don't worry, we're all very friendly here. We just want to preserve the natural beauty and property values for everyone. I'll have our administrator send you the full covenant documents and the welcome packet. There's a small annual fee, of course, just to cover maintenance costs. Only $1,200 a year. Very reasonable." $1,200. I was living on Social Security and what was left of my savings. $1,200 might as well have been $12,000. "I'll take a look at the documents," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. "Wonderful. Oh, and just so you know, we have a community cleanup day scheduled for next month. We'd love to see you there. We're also planning our annual garden tour in June." Such a lovely event. "Well, I'll let you get back to your work. Remember, architectural review for any changes. Have a blessed day." She walked back to her SUV, still smiling, and drove away. I stood there on my half-finished porch, holding a basket of expensive garbage and a pamphlet that felt like a threat. I threw the basket in the trash. I should have thrown the pamphlet away too. Instead, I sat down at my little kitchen table that night and read every word. Architectural review, approved color palettes, restrictions on outbuildings, prohibitions on livestock, commercial vehicles, and unsightly storage, mandatory landscaping standards, fines for non-compliance starting at $50 per day. And at the very end, a paragraph about how all properties within the designated boundaries were subject to these covenants in perpetuity. My property wasn't on their little map. It was drawn wrong, or they'd expanded the boundaries, or something was off. But that pamphlet sat on my table like a coiled snake, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this woman, this Diane Pritchard, with her white pants and fake smile, wasn't done with me. I was right. It came certified mail. 6 weeks after Diane's visit, I'd almost forgotten about her, almost convinced myself it was just a neighbor being nosy, nothing to worry about. I'd been working on the cabin, getting it livable. I'd cleared some brush, stacked firewood, started a small garden where Sarah used to plant tomatoes back at our old house. I was starting to feel like maybe, just maybe, I could make this work, that I could live here and be okay. The mail truck came up my driveway on a Thursday in early May. The driver, a young kid I'd seen around, made me sign for a thick manila envelope, official looking. Return address said Riverside Estates HOA Legal Department. Legal Department, an HOA with a legal department. I waited until he drove away before I opened it. My hands were shaking. I don't know why. Maybe some part of me knew what was coming. Maybe Sarah was trying to warn me from wherever she was. The letter was 3 pages long. Typed, official letterhead. Notice of violation and demand for payment. They were billing me for 5 years of back dues. 5 years, $6,000. They claimed my property had been part of the HOA since they incorporated in 2018, that the previous owner had been in arrears, and that the debt transferred to me with the property. They listed violations, unpermitted structures, my repaired dock, unsightly storage, my firewood stacked against the cabin, unapproved modifications, the porch railing I'd replaced. Each violation came with a $50 per day fine. The dock violation alone had supposedly been accruing since the day I took ownership, 42 days at $50 per violation per day, and they claimed 3 separate violations. The total amount due, $9,300, due in 30 days. Failure to pay would result in a lien on my property and potential foreclosure. Foreclosure. They were threatening to take my land, the land I'd bought with the last money Sarah and I had saved, the land where I'd scattered her ashes in the river at sunrise because she'd loved this place in the old photographs I'd shown her. They were threatening to take it because I'd fixed a dock and stacked some firewood and replaced some rotten wood. I sat in my kitchen and read that letter 3 times. Then I read it again. My vision was blurring. I couldn't tell if it was from rage or tears or both. I set the letter down very carefully on the table, walked outside, and stood on my dock, looking at the river. The sun was setting. Sarah would have loved that sunset, all orange and pink, reflecting off the water. She always said, sunsets were God's way of saying goodnight. They're trying to take it, I said out loud to her, to the river, to nobody. They're trying to take the only place we have left. Something inside me didn't just break, it didn't crack. It turned hard, like steel cooling after being forged. I walked back inside, picked up that letter, and made a decision. They wanted a fight, they were going to get one. But not the fight they expected, not the fight they were ready for. They thought I was just some old man who'd roll over and die quietly. They were about to learn what happens when you threaten someone who's already lost everything that mattered. They were about to learn that old men who've got nothing left to lose are the most dangerous men in the world. Uh, I drove to their office the next morning, didn't call ahead, didn't make an appointment. I found the address at the bottom of the letter, a little strip mall building about 20 minutes from my property, tucked between a real estate office and a yoga studio. Riverside Estates HOA administrative office in gold letters on a glass door. I walked in wearing my work boots, the ones with mud caked on the sides, worn jeans, a flannel shirt with a hole in the elbow. I probably smelled like river water and sweat. Good. I wanted them to see exactly who they were messing with. There was a reception desk with a girl who couldn't have been more than 25. Blonde. Perky. She looked up from her computer and gave me a customer service smile. "Hi there. Do you have an appointment? I need to speak with Diane Pritchard or whoever's in charge of this." I dropped the letter on her desk. Her smile faltered. She glanced at the letter. Let me see if Mrs. Pritchard is available. Can I have your name?" I gave it to her. She picked up the phone, spoke quietly into it, and a minute later Diane appeared from a back office. She was wearing a blazer and those same kind of expensive pants. Her smile was even faker than the receptionist's. "Hello. So glad you came in. We can definitely work through this together. Why don't you come back to the conference room?" I followed her. The conference room had a long table, motivational posters on the wall, and a water cooler in the corner. She sat down and gestured for me to sit across from her. I stayed standing. "Mrs. Pritchard, I bought that property free and clear 3 months ago. There was nothing in my deed. About an HOA, nothing about dues, and now you're telling me I owe you $9,000 or you'll take my land?" She folded her hands on the table. "I understand this must be frustrating. Unfortunately, the covenants that govern Riverside Estates run with the land. That means they transfer automatically with property ownership, whether or not they were explicitly disclosed at closing. The previous owner was in violation, and those violations transferred to you. That's not legal." "Actually, it is. The covenants were properly recorded with the county. We have all the documentation. I'd be happy to provide you with copies. As for the amount due, we're willing to work out a payment plan." "I'm not paying." Her smile tightened. "Sir, I understand you're upset, but no." I pulled my deed out of my back pocket. I'd brought it with me. "You understand nothing. This land belonged to my family before your Riverside Estates even existed. My grandfather fished here. My father taught me to swim in that river. I bought this property with the last money my wife and I saved before she died of cancer. I scattered her ashes in that river 6 weeks ago because it was the only place left that felt like peace. You want to know what's frustrating? Watching the woman you love waste away for 18 months. Selling the home where you raised your children because you can't stand to be there without her. Moving to the one place that still feels like she's with me, and then having some committee tell you they're going to take it." I threw the deed on the table. "That's my deed. Show me where it says I'm part of your association. Show me where it says I owe you a damn dime." Diane picked up the deed. She glanced at it. Her expression didn't change. The covenant boundaries were established. "Show me." She didn't have it with her. She made an excuse about needing to pull files. She called someone else into the room, a man in a polo shirt with a clipboard who introduced himself as the compliance officer. He had the same fake smile, the same corporate speak. They showed me a map on a laptop, a digital map with colored boundaries that supposedly proved my property was included. But my deed didn't match their map. The property lines were off. The lot numbers were wrong. I pointed this out. They exchanged looks. They talked around it. They used words like survey discrepancy and administrative oversight and good faith effort to resolve. I listened to them talk in circles for 20 minutes, and then I picked up my deed and walked toward the door. "Where are you going?" Diane called after me. "To find someone who knows what the hell they're talking about." I left them sitting in that conference room with their laptop and their clipboard and their fake smiles. I got in my truck and drove straight to the county courthouse. If they wanted to play games with property records and covenants and legal threats, fine. But I'd been alive long enough to know that courthouses don't lie. Paper doesn't lie, and somebody in that building would know the truth. The county courthouse is a gray stone building that's been standing since 1938. I'd been there before, years ago, handling paperwork when my father passed. It smelled the same. Old paper, floor polish, and the particular mustiness of a government building that's seen decades of human misery pass through its doors. I went to the records office. There was a woman behind the counter, maybe 60, with reading glasses on a chain and tired eyes that said she'd been doing this job too long. I put my deed on the counter. Ma'am, I need to see the original plat for this property and any covenants or restrictions that were recorded with it. She looked at the deed, looked at me. This about the Riverside Estates mess? You know about it? She snorted. Honey, half the people who come through here lately are dealing with that HOA. They've been expanding their boundaries like they're building an empire. Hold on. She disappeared into the back. I stood there for 20 minutes, listening to the fluorescent lights buzz overhead, watching other people come and go with their own problems, their own paperwork, their own battles with bureaucracy. When she came back, she had 3 boxes. Actual cardboard archive boxes stuffed with old documents, survey maps, and what looked like hand-drawn plat books from before everything was digitized. Your property, she said, spreading papers across the counter, was originally part of the Clemens family homestead, 1887. It was subdivided in 1952 when Thomas Clemens sold off parcels to pay debts. Your lot, this 3-acre piece, was sold to a William Masterson. That was your grandfather? Yes, ma'am. Thought so. I remember when he used to come in here with your daddy. Always wore that old fishing hat. She smiled, a real smile. Not like Diane's. Your property has been continuously owned outside of any subdivision since 1952. The Riverside Estates development didn't even start until 2017. They incorporated their HOA in 2018, and according to the recorded plat for Riverside Estates, she pulled out a large survey map, official stamps, and signatures all over it. Your property's not included. They drew their boundaries right up to your fence line, but you're not in it. Never were. I felt something loosen in my chest. Then why are they saying because they're idiots or liars or both? About 5 years ago, they tried to file an amended plat that would have expanded their boundaries to include your property and 3 others. The county rejected it because you can't just annex someone's land into an HOA without their consent. But I bet they never told you that. I bet they're still using that rejected map and hoping nobody checks the actual recorded documents. She pushed a paper toward me. This is the official recorded plat. Take it. Make copies. And you might want to talk to Tom Hendricks over at Hendricks & Son. He's an attorney who's been fighting these HOA cases for years. He helped the Mallory family keep their farm when Riverside tried the same thing. I took the paper. My hands were steadier now. Thank you, ma'am. You've been more help than you know. Honey, I've been working in this office for 34 years. I've seen good people lose their homes over paperwork they didn't understand. I'm glad I could help you keep yours. Now go give them hell. I left that courthouse with ammunition. Real ammunition. The kind that's deadlier than any gun. The truth. In writing. Stamped and recorded and impossible to argue with. I called Tom Hendricks from my truck. He answered on the second ring. I explained the situation. He didn't sound surprised. Can you be in my office tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock? Bring everything, your deed, the letter they sent, any communication you've had with them, and bring that plat you got from the county. I think we can shut this down pretty fast, but I need to see what we're working with. How much is this going to cost me? He was quiet for a second. First consultation is free. After that, we'll work out an arrangement. But between you and me, I hate these HOA vultures. They prey on people who don't know better. If your paperwork's as solid as it sounds, this won't take long. And when we're done, they'll be paying your legal fees, not you. That's how we'll structure this. I bill my time, you pay nothing up front, and we recover every penny from them when we win. I met with Tom the next morning. His office was above a hardware store in town, the kind of small town attorney who knows everybody and doesn't charge Manhattan prices. He was maybe 50, with a beard going gray, and a handshake that meant something. He spread my documents across his desk, put on his reading glasses, and spent an hour going through everything. When he looked up, he was smiling. They don't have a leg to stand on. Your property was never part of the HOA, never subject to their covenants. They're trying to intimidate you into paying for something you don't owe. It's borderline fraud. So what do? First, we send them a cease and desist. Make it clear you know your property isn't subject to their authority, and any further harassment will result in legal action. That might be enough to make them back off. And if it's not? Tom leaned back in his chair. Then we get creative. See, here's the thing about these HOAs. They operate on the assumption that they're untouchable, that they can bully people because most folks don't have the time or money to fight back. But once you start digging into their operations, once you force them to produce their documents and justify their actions in court, they tend to fall apart pretty fast. Discovery is a beautiful thing. Discovery? If they sue you or if you sue them, both sides have to turn over relevant documents. During the discovery phase, financial records, meeting minutes, communications, everything. And in my experience, organizations like this one usually have things they don't want exposed. Mismanaged funds, selective enforcement, board members voting themselves contracts. Once that stuff comes to light, their legal position crumbles. He pulled out a yellow legal pad and started writing. But here's what I'm thinking. Your property has been in your family for generations, right? And it's on the river? Yes, sir. Did your grandfather ever use it for commercial fishing, farming, any kind of agricultural purpose? I thought about it. He had chickens, some goats, I think, for brush clearing. And he used to guide fishing trips in the summer for extra money. Had a little sign up on the main road. Tom's smile got wider. Agricultural use? Commercial fishing operation. Do you know what that means? No, sir. It means your property might have grandfathered agricultural exemptions, which means you might have the legal right to resume those activities. Livestock, commercial operations, things that would normally be restricted in a residential area don't apply to properties with established agricultural use. He looked up at me. Do you see where I'm going with this? I did. I saw exactly where he was going. And for the first time since Sarah died, I felt something close to joy. Tom and I spent the next 2 hours going through old records. He made calls. He pulled up county ordinances. He found documentation of my grandfather's fishing guide business, actual business licenses from the 1960s still on file. He found records of livestock kept on the property, going back to the original homestead in the 1800s. Your property has continuous agricultural use going back over a century, he said. That's gold. The county's agricultural preservation laws protect that. You have the right to resume those activities. Chickens, goats, cattle if you want. You could even restart the fishing guide service if you felt like it. And the HOA can't stop me. They can't stop you because you're not in their HOA. But even if you were, agricultural exemptions usually override HOA covenants. It's state law. They'd have to prove your activities constitute a nuisance, and that's a very high bar to clear. He sat back, tapping his pen against the desk. Now, I'm your attorney, so I have to advise you to take the diplomatic route. We send the cease and desist. We wait for their response. We resolve this civilly if possible. He paused. But off the record, if I were in your position and some HOA tried to steal my family land after I'd just lost my wife, I'd make them regret it, legally, of course, completely within my rights, but I'd make them understand that threatening the wrong person has consequences. I met his eyes. What did you have in mind? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just saying that if someone were to exercise their legal rights in a way that happened to inconvenience a neighborhood association that had been harassing them, well, that would be perfectly legal. Malicious compliance, they call it, following the letter of the law in a way that makes people wish they'd left you alone. He pulled out a county ordinance book, flipped to a marked page. For example, livestock regulations in this county are pretty loose for agriculturally zoned land. You can keep goats, sheep, even cattle, as long as you maintain certain space requirements and sanitation standards. No permit required for fewer than 10 head. And here's the interesting part. He pointed to another section. Riparian rights, that's water rights. Your property is on the river. Your family has used that river for over a century. You have the legal right to access and use that waterway, which includes moving livestock across it, operating boats, even constructing temporary structures like docks or fishing platforms. The HOA built their little community park downstream from you, didn't they? They did, with a public boat launch. Public meaning HOA members, built about 5 years ago. I remember the permits. They had to do an environmental study. They were very proud of it, very pristine, very controlled. He closed the book. Imagine what would happen if someone exercised their grandfathered agricultural and riparian rights at, say, 6 in the morning on a Saturday, when the HOA was planning to host one of their community events. And imagine if that someone was moving livestock across their property in a way that was completely legal, but happened to impact the HOA's pristine little park area. Muddy hoof prints, natural fertilizer, the smell of farm animals, all perfectly legal, all perfectly protected under agricultural exemption laws. That's a hell of an imagination you've got, counselor. I'm just thinking out loud, entirely theoretical. He was grinning now. Of course, you'd want to make sure you documented everything. Photos? Permits if required, though I don't think you'd need any. Notifications to the appropriate county agencies that you're resuming agricultural activities on grandfathered land. Everything by the book. That way, when they complain, and they will complain, you have proof that you're operating completely within the law. I sat there thinking. Sarah wouldn't have approved. She always said revenge was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. But Sarah wasn't here. Sarah was gone, and these people were trying to take the last thing I had left of the life we'd planned together, the place where her ashes drifted in the current. How long would it take to set something like this up? Hypothetically, you could buy a few goats this week, register them with the county ag extension office, get your paperwork in order, resume agricultural operations by next weekend, if you wanted to. And they couldn't do anything about it. They could complain. They could call the sheriff. The sheriff would come out, see that you're operating legally on your own property, and tell them there's nothing he can do. They could try to sue you, but they'd lose, and then we'd countersue for harassment. Plus, if they sued you, we'd get discovery. We'd get to see all their dirty laundry. Most HOAs don't want that. He leaned forward. The beauty of malicious compliance is that you're not breaking any laws. You're not doing anything wrong. You're just exercising rights you've always had. If they have a problem with it, that's their problem, not yours. I thought about Diane Pritchard and her white pants and fake smile. I thought about that letter threatening to foreclose on my property. I thought about Sarah and how she'd wanted us to grow old together in a place like this, peaceful and quiet and ours. When can we get started? Tom pulled out a contract. I'll draft the cease and desist today. Send it certified mail. Give them 10 days to respond. While we're waiting, you're free to do whatever you want on your own property. Resume agricultural activities, make improvements, live your life. If they're smart, they'll back off after they get the letter. If they're not, they're going to learn what it means to mess with an old man who has nothing left to lose. I didn't hear that, Tom said, but he was smiling. I bought 6 goats, 3 does, 2 wethers, and a buck named Hank, who had a mean look in his eye and an attitude that reminded me of myself. Cost me $800 from a farmer about 40 miles away. He delivered them on a Thursday in a livestock trailer, helped me set up temporary fencing on my property, and gave me a crash course in goat care. They're browsers, he said. They'll eat anything, brush, weeds, bark if you let them. Great for land clearing. This buck, though, he pointed at Hank. He's territorial. Don't turn your back on him. Perfect. I registered them with the County Ag Extension Office the next day. Filed a notice of agricultural resumption. Got documentation that my property's historical agricultural use was being reinstated. Everything legal, everything documented, everything by the book. Tom sent the cease and desist on Friday, certified mail. I got notification that Diane Pritchard signed for it on Monday morning. She called me that afternoon. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. Hi, this is Diane Pritchard from Riverside Estates. I received some correspondence from your attorney that is, frankly, quite concerning and based on some misunderstandings about the property boundaries. I'd love to sit down and talk this through before things escalate. Please give me a call back. I deleted the voicemail. Wednesday morning, I got a letter, not certified this time, just regular mail, an invitation. Riverside Estates Annual Spring Community Picnic and Garden Tour, scheduled for Saturday at 10 a.m. at the community park. All residents welcome. Potluck lunch, children's activities, live music. It had clip art flowers on it and looked like something made by a church group. I checked the HOA's website. They'd been promoting this event for months. It was their big spring showcase. They'd even sent press releases to the local paper. Photos from previous years showed hundreds of people crowded around that pristine park by the river, the one they'd built downstream from my property. Perfect lawns, white tents, families in sundresses and polo shirts. I looked at the invitation, looked at my calendar, looked out at my goats, who were currently destroying a patch of invasive honeysuckle, and seemed very happy about it. Saturday morning, 6 a.m. I'd need help moving the goats. I'd need to exercise my riparian rights to access the waterway. I'd need to conduct routine agricultural activities on my property, which happened to be directly upstream from their park, all perfectly legal. I called Tom. That picnic they're having Saturday? I saw the invitation. They sent me one too. Interestingly enough, guess they don't check their mailing lists. I'm planning to move my goats Saturday morning, early. Need to rotate them to fresh browse on the riverside section of my property, exercise my water rights, routine agricultural work. There was a long pause. Then Tom started laughing. What time should I arrive to document that your activities are being conducted legally and safely? 5:30, bring a camera. Friday afternoon, I drove to see Eddie Kurtz, a guy I'd known for 30 years. He'd worked construction with me back in the 80s before I moved into the office, and he started his own excavation business. He was in his 60s now, running a small operation with his sons. Eddie, I need to borrow your stock trailer and maybe 2 of your boys for a few hours Saturday morning. Early. How early? 5 a.m.? He looked at me over the rim of his coffee cup. We were standing in his equipment yard, surrounded by backhoes and bulldozers. What are you up to, old man? I told him. Everything. The HOA, the threats, the cease and desist, the goats. When I finished, he was grinning. You're going to ruin their picnic with goats. I'm going to conduct routine agricultural activities on my property. At 6 in the morning of their event. Coincidence? You're an evil old bastard. I love it. My boys will be there at 5. No charge. This is entertainment. Saturday morning came. I was up at 4. Couldn't sleep anyway. I made coffee, fed the goats, and waited. Eddie's truck pulled up at 5 with the livestock trailer. His 2 sons, boys in their 30s, who were bigger than trees, climbed out grinning. "Dad told us," the older one said. "We wouldn't miss this." Tom arrived at 5:30 with a video camera and a notary stamp. "For the record," he said, "I'm here to document that my client is engaging in legal agricultural activities on his property." "Noted, counselor." We loaded the goats into the trailer. Hank tried to headbutt Eddie's younger son and got yelled at. The sun was just starting to lighten the eastern sky. Perfect timing. My property extended down to the riverbank and about 50 yards along the shoreline. The HOA's park was another 100 yards downstream, connected by the river. The plan was simple. Move the goats from their current paddock to the riverside browse area, let them do what goats do, and exercise my legal right to access and work along the waterway that crossed through my property. We drove the trailer as close as we could, then walked the goats down to the river. It was slow going. Goats don't move fast, and Hank kept stopping to eat things. By the time we got them to the riverside section, it was 6:15, and I could hear activity from the park, voices, trucks. The HOA volunteers were arriving early to set up. The goats immediately started doing goat things, eating brush, climbing on things. Hank found a muddy section of bank and rolled in it, then shook off and wandered toward the water. One of the does decided to test how far downstream she could go. Eddie's sons herded her back, laughing. "They're going to smell these goats in about 10 minutes, Eddie said. "Goats have a distinctive aroma, agricultural reality." Tom was filming everything. "For the record, the time is 6:23 a.m., and he said my name, is conducting routine livestock management on his property, which holds grandfathered agricultural status dating back to 1887. By 6:45, the goats had thoroughly browsed the riverside area and left evidence of their presence everywhere. Hoofprints in the mud, natural fertilizer on the bank. Hank had gotten into the water, crossed partially downstream, and left a trail of muddy hoofprints on rocks that were visible from the park. We were packing up to leave when I heard someone shouting. A man in a Riverside Estates polo shirt came running up the riverside path. He stopped when he saw us, saw the goats, saw the mud. His face went purple. "What the hell are you doing?" I turned to look at him, took my time. "Morning, I'm conducting agricultural activities on my property, moving my livestock to fresh browse. You can't, the park, we have an event." "The park's not my property. This is. You have a problem?" "The smell is going to, people are starting to arrive. You did this on purpose. I'm farming on my farm, same as my grandfather did, same as his father did. You want to take it up with someone, call the sheriff. I'm sure he'll be interested to hear why you think I can't use my own land." Tom stepped forward, camera still rolling. "I'm this gentleman's attorney. He's operating completely within his legal rights on property with grandfathered agricultural status. If you have concerns, you're welcome to file a complaint with the county, but I assure you everything here is documented and legal." The man looked like he was about to have a stroke. He pulled out his phone and started calling someone, probably Diane. Eddie leaned over to his son and whispered, "This is better than a cable." We finished loading the goats, took another 20 minutes because they didn't want to leave their new favorite spot, and drove back to my cabin. By the time we got there, the sun was fully up and it was 7:30. "Coffee?" I asked. We sat on my porch drinking coffee and watching the sunrise. Around 8, we heard sirens. Not many, just one. A sheriff's deputy drove past my driveway, heading toward the park. "They called the cops," Eddie's son said. "On goats," his brother added. They both started laughing. The deputy showed up at my place around 9. I knew him, Deputy Marsh, been with the county for years. Well, he got out of his cruiser looking tired and skeptical. "Morning, got a complaint about livestock disturbing a community event. Livestock's back in their paddock. I was just moving them to fresh browse this morning, early, before it got hot. Standard farm work. on the day they're having their big picnic. Didn't know about any picnic. I don't live in their HOA. He looked at me, looked at Tom, who was still on my porch with his camera, and looked at the goats, who were peacefully eating hay in their fenced area. His expression was carefully neutral, professional. "You got registration for those animals?" I handed him the paperwork. "Filed with the county AGI extension on Monday. Property has historical agricultural use going back to the 1800s. All documented." He looked at the papers carefully, handed them back. "You know they're pissed, right?" "Not my problem. I'm farming my own land. Technically speaking, you didn't do anything wrong." He paused, then added quietly, "Between you and me, somebody needed to remind that HOA they don't run the whole county. They've been calling us out for noise complaints on farms that have been here longer than any of us. But this," he gestured at the goats, "keep your livestock contained. Don't let them wander off your property. Other than that, you have a nice day." He got back in his cruiser. Tom was grinning. Eddie was laughing so hard he was crying. "You actually did it," Tom said. "You ruined their picnic with goats. I conducted routine agricultural activities." That too. We could hear more activity from the park. Car doors, voices. Some of them sounded angry. The picnic was starting, but it wasn't starting the way they'd planned. Not with the smell of wet goat and fresh manure drifting downstream. Not with muddy hoofprints all over their pristine riverbank. I sat there on my porch with my coffee, listening to them deal with the consequences of threatening a man who had nothing left to lose. And for the first time since Sarah died, I felt something like satisfaction. They wanted to take my peace. Fine. They could have a little chaos instead. Turns out freedom smells like wet goat. The letter came 3 days later, not certified this time. Hand-delivered by a process server who looked apologetic when I opened the door. "Sorry about this, sir." I took the envelope, knew what it was before I opened it. They were suing me. Riverside Estates Homeowners Association versus my name. A civil complaint filed in county court. They were asking for an emergency injunction to stop my agricultural activities, claiming I was creating a public nuisance, violating health codes, and deliberately interfering with their peaceful enjoyment of common areas. The language was aggressive, words like malicious, intentional, and harassment. They claim my actions were specifically designed to damage their property values and disrupt their community. They were asking the court to order me to remove the livestock, pay for remediation of the park area, and reimburse them for costs associated with the ruined picnic event. They wanted $15,000 in damages. I called Tom. He came over that evening with a six-pack and his reading glasses. We sat on my porch while he went through the complaint, page by page. "This is desperation," he said after a while. "They're throwing everything at the wall, hoping something sticks. But here's the problem for them. They've opened the door to discovery. They sued you. Now we get to demand their documents, financial records, meeting minutes, communications, everything. What are we looking for? Anything that shows they knew your property wasn't part of the HOA when they sent that first demand letter. Anything that shows selective enforcement, going after you while ignoring violations by their friends. Anything that shows financial mismanagement. HOAs are notorious for it. Board members voting themselves contracts. Funds mysteriously disappearing. Dues going up while services go down." He took a long drink of his beer. "And here's the beautiful part. They're claiming you're damaging their property values. That means we get to bring in expert testimony about whether your legal agricultural activities actually constitute a nuisance. We can bring in the county ag extension officer who approved your livestock. We can bring in environmental experts who will testify that goats are actually beneficial for controlling invasive species. We can make them look ridiculous. How long does this take?" "Months, usually, but they've asked for an emergency injunction, which means we'll be in front of a judge in about 2 weeks for a preliminary hearing. That's our first chance to start exposing what they've been doing. And given the emergency nature, the judge will likely order expedited discovery if we proceed to trial, meaning weeks instead of months. He set the complaint down. There's something else. While I was doing research on Riverside Estates, I found something interesting. You know how they're always talking about maintaining property values and common areas? Yeah, I pulled their tax records. They're classified as a nonprofit corporation, which means their finances are public record. Last year, they collected over $300,000 in dues from members. Their reported expenses were $210,000. That leaves $90,000 unaccounted for in just 1 year. Where'd it go? Great question. Their financial statements listed as administrative costs and reserve funds, but there's no breakdown. And get this, Diane Pritchard, the president, her husband owns a landscaping company. Want to guess who has the contract for maintaining all those pristine common areas? You're kidding. Nope. Pritchard Landscaping, LLC. They've been getting paid $60,000 a year for the last 3 years. No competitive bidding. No other quotes. Just a sweetheart deal voted through by a board that includes Mrs. Pritchard herself. I sat back in my chair. The sun was setting over the river, painting everything orange and gold. Sarah would have loved this. Not the legal fight, she hated conflict, but the sunset and the fact that these people who'd threatened to take the place where her ashes rested were about to get exposed for the frauds they were. So, what do? We file our response. We deny all their claims. We assert your rights under agricultural exemption laws. And then we file a counterclaim for harassment, abuse of process, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We ask for our attorney's fees, your costs, and damages for the stress they've caused you. Damages? You're a 75-year-old widower who bought this property to find peace after watching your wife die. You scattered her ashes here. They threatened to foreclose on it with fraudulent claims. That's emotional distress. We can quantify that. He pulled out his yellow legal pad and started writing. But here's what I really want to do. I want to schedule depositions, Diane Pritchard first, her husband second. Every board member after that. Put them under oath and ask them questions they don't want to answer. About the boundaries, about the finances, about why they sent you that first demand letter when they knew, or should have known, your property wasn't in the HOA. You think they knew. I think someone knew. I think they've been playing fast and loose with boundary maps and hoping nobody has the resources to fight back. You're not the first person they've gone after. Remember I mentioned the Mallory family farm? 3 other families before that. All of them paid something just to make the HOA go away, even though they probably didn't owe anything. It's a protection racket dressed up in nice landscaping and community events. I thought about that, about how many other people, maybe old people, maybe people who just lost someone, maybe people who couldn't afford attorneys, had paid money to these vultures just to be left alone. How do we make sure they can't do this to anyone else? Tom smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. We make an example of them. We expose everything. And when we're done, they'll think twice before threatening another property owner. Then let's do it. The discovery process started 4 weeks later, right after the judge denied their emergency injunction. The hearing had been beautiful. They'd brought photographs of the muddy riverbank, testimony from park volunteers about the unbearable smell, and a landscaping estimate for cleanup costs. Tom brought the county ag extension officer, who testified that my livestock activities were textbook appropriate for the property. He brought my property records showing continuous agricultural use since the 1800s. He brought the official recorded plat map showing my property was not, had never been, and could never be part of Riverside Estates without my written consent. The judge, a woman in her 60s who'd grown up on a farm, listened to both sides and then said something I'll never forget. Counsel. The defendant is exercising grandfathered agricultural rights on his own property. The fact that the plaintiff's organization built a recreational park downstream from an active agricultural property does not give them standing to prohibit legal farming activities. Motion for injunction denied. We'll proceed with the case, but I'm not stopping this man from keeping goats on his own land. Diane Pritchard's face when the judge said, "That was worth every dollar this fight was costing me." Now came the fun part, discovery. Tom filed demands for documents, all communications between board members regarding my property, all financial records for the past 5 years, all correspondence with their attorney, meeting minutes, emails, text messages, everything. They fought it. Their attorney filed motions to limit discovery, claiming it was overly broad and fishing expedition. The judge disagreed. The plaintiff has accused the defendant of intentional harassment and interference. The defendant is entitled to discover whether the plaintiff has engaged in similar patterns of behavior with other property owners. Document demands are reasonable. Produce the records. They produced boxes, literal boxes of papers, delivered to Tom's office over the course of 3 weeks. We spent days going through them. Tom, me, and a paralegal he'd brought in to help. We found everything. Emails from Diane to other board members about problem properties that needed to be brought into compliance. A list of 12 properties, including mine, that were targeted for annexation into the HOA boundaries despite having no legal basis for inclusion. Financial records showing that Pritchard Landscaping had been paid over $180,000 in the past 3 years, with invoices that listed vague services like grounds maintenance and seasonal enhancement with no supporting documentation. Meeting minutes from a board session where they discussed my property specifically. This was 2 months before I even bought it. They knew it was about to be sold. They knew the previous owner had let the property go to hell, and they'd voted to proactively address the new owner and establish HOA authority before I had a chance to settle in. They'd planned this before I even moved in, before I'd unpacked Sarah's coffee mug or fixed the dock or had a single peaceful morning watching the sunrise, before I'd scattered her ashes in that water. They'd been planning to take my land, but the smoking gun, the thing that made Tom actually laugh out loud when he found it, was an email from Diane to the HOA's attorney. It was dated 3 weeks before they sent me that first demand letter. We need to move quickly on the Clemens Creek property before the new owner realizes he's not technically within our boundaries. If we can establish payment history and compliance expectations early, we can argue implied consent to HOA authority. The boundary discrepancy isn't obvious in the digital maps, and most new owners don't check the recorded plats. We should be able to secure payment before he hires counsel. Tom read it out loud twice. Then he looked at me. They knew. They knew your property wasn't in the HOA, and they tried to defraud you anyway. This is intentional. This is fraud, and this email is going straight to the judge. We scheduled depositions. Diane first. She showed up in a business suit with her attorney looking confident. Tom spent 4 hours destroying her. He walked her through the email, or made her read it out loud, asked her to explain what she meant by boundary discrepancy and implied consent. She stumbled, said she'd been mistaken, said the email was taken out of context. "Mrs. Pritchard, you wrote that the new owner, my client, probably wouldn't check the recorded plats. Were you hoping he wouldn't discover that his property is not and never has been part of Riverside Estates? We believed at the time that the property..." Answer the question. Were you hoping he wouldn't check the recorded plats? Long pause. We were attempting to clarify the boundaries. By sending him a demand letter for $9,000 before clarifying anything? Her attorney objected. Tom moved on. He asked about Pritchard Landscaping, about the contracts, about whether the board had solicited competitive bids. She admitted they hadn't, said her husband's company had institutional knowledge of the property. Institutional knowledge worth $60,000 a year, more than 3 times what similar-sized communities pay for landscaping services. She got angry, started snapping at Tom. That's when he brought out the other documents, communications with other property owners, the Mallory farm, the Hendersons, the Chen family, 8 families total who'd been sent similar demand letters. 5 of them had paid something, 3 had fought it and eventually been left alone after hiring attorneys. You have a pattern, don't you, Mrs. Pritchard? You identify properties on the edges of your development, properties that may or may not be included in your boundaries, and you threaten the owners with foreclosure until they pay you. Those who can't afford lawyers pay. Those who can, you back away from quietly. Isn't that right? That's not. We're trying to maintain community standard. You're running a protection racket. You're targeting vulnerable property owners and extorting money from them under threat of taking their homes. Her attorney called for a break. When they came back, Diane was pale and wouldn't make eye contact. Tom deposed her husband next, then 3 board members, then their attorney. Each deposition was worse than the last. The attorney admitted he'd never actually reviewed the recorded plat map before sending me the first demand letter. Just took the HOA's word for it that my property was included. The board members admitted they'd rubber stamped the landscaping contracts without review. One of them admitted he didn't even know what the HOA was spending money on, just voted yes on whatever Diane proposed. By the end of discovery, we had them. We had proof of fraud, proof of self-dealing, proof of a pattern of targeting property owners who couldn't fight back. We had everything. Tom scheduled a settlement conference. Before we went, he pulled out one more document, something he'd been saving. Remember how I said your property might have additional rights beyond just agricultural use? Yeah. I did some more digging. Your property includes a section of riverbank that was historically used as a crossing point. There's a right-of-way easement recorded in 1912 for river access and crossing for livestock and commercial transport. It was granted to your great-grandfather, and it runs with the land. Perpetual easement. What does that mean? It means you have the legal right to use a section of the river for transport, not just on your property. The easement extends downstream 150 yards, which includes the entire section of river that runs through their park. So you could move livestock across the river. You could float logs down it. You could operate commercial fishing boats through that section. You could do anything that qualifies as river access and crossing for commercial transport, all completely legal, all protected under an easement that predates their park by over a century. He pulled out a survey map showing the easement boundaries. It cut right through the middle of their pristine riverside park, the same park where they held their garden tours and summer concerts and fancy community events. If you wanted to, Tom said slowly, you could exercise that easement right during their next major event, float some logs down the river, move livestock across it, remind them that their pretty little park was built on land your family has been using for commercial purposes since before their grandparents were born. I looked at the map, at the easement line cutting through their park. At the date on the original deed, 1912, when my great-grandfather was running timber down this river to the mill downstream. When's their next event? Tom smiled. Garden tour, 3 weeks from Saturday. 200 expected attendees. They've been advertising it for months. It's their biggest fundraiser of the year. Fundraiser? They charge admission, $50 per person, $10,000 in revenue if they sell out, which they usually do. I thought about it. Thought about Sarah, who loved gardens. Thought about how she'd wanted to plant flowers here by the river and never got the chance. Thought about these people who'd tried to take that dream away from me. I think, I said carefully, it's time to exercise my easement rights. Planning the operation took 2 weeks. Tom made sure every detail was legal and documented. We filed notice with the county that I was exercising my historical easement rights for commercial timber transport. We registered with the state environmental agency. Turns out you need permits to float logs down a river. but they're easy to get if you have a historical easement. I bought 15 logs, not huge ones, 8 to 10 feet long, 6 to 8 inches thick, the kind that would float easily but make a statement. I bought them from a timber company upriver and had them delivered to my property, stacked them on the bank, waited. Eddie and his boys agreed to help again. So did Tom, who said this was the most fun he'd had practicing law in 20 years. We recruited 2 more people, a retired river guide named Frank, who knew the currents, and his daughter Amy, who ran a kayak rental business and thought the whole thing was hilarious. You're really going to float logs through their garden tour? I'm exercising my historical easement rights for commercial timber transport. What they're doing at the time is not my concern. The garden tour was scheduled for Saturday, May 18th. From 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., we planned our operation for 10:30. Give them time to get set up, get the attendees settled in, get comfortable, then remind them whose river this really was. Friday night, I couldn't sleep. Lay in my cot staring at the ceiling, thinking about Sarah, wondering what she'd think of all this. She always said I was stubborn, said I'd argue with a fence post if it disagreed with me. She'd probably tell me to let it go, to be the bigger person, to find peace without revenge, but she wasn't here, and they'd threatened to take the last place where I could still feel close to her, where her ashes had become part of the current, part of the river, part of this land. Saturday morning came clear and beautiful. Perfect day for a garden tour. I was up at 5, had coffee, fed the goats. Eddie and his boys showed up at 8 with the equipment we'd need: ropes, flotation devices, and a small aluminum boat with an outboard motor in case any logs got stuck. Frank and Amy arrived at 9 with their kayaks. Tom showed up at 9:30 with his camera and his lawyer face on. Last chance to back out, he said. Not a chance in hell. We started moving logs to the water at 9:45. The easement specified we had to start from our property line, which meant carrying them down to the specific section of riverbank where the easement began. It was hard work. I'm old and logs are heavy, but Eddie's boys did most of the lifting. By 10:15, all 15 logs were staged at the water's edge. From where we stood, we could see the park downstream. White tents were set up. People were arriving in nice clothes, parking in the lot, walking the garden paths with their tickets and cameras. I could hear music playing, classical something, violins. At 10 to 25, Tom checked his watch. We're within the approved activity window. Everything's documented. You ready? I looked at those logs, looked at the river, looked at the park downstream where a bunch of rich people were about to have their perfect day interrupted by reality. Let's exercise my easement rights. We started at 10:30 exactly. Eddie and Frank rolled the first log into the water. It floated. Current caught it, started carrying it downstream. We waited 2 minutes, then launched the second one, then the third. Staggered timing, just like Frank recommended, so they'd float through the park area in a steady stream over about 45 minutes. Amy and Tom got in kayaks to follow the logs downstream, document everything, and make sure nobody got hurt. I got in Eddie's boat with Eddie and his boys. Frank stayed on shore to launch the remaining logs on schedule, and the first log hit the park area at 10:38. I watched through binoculars from the boat, saw people on the riverbank pointing, saw someone run toward the main tent. The log floated peacefully through the exact center of their designated riverside viewing area, where attendees were supposed to enjoy wine and hors d'oeuvres while looking at native wildflower plantings. The second log came through 3 minutes later, then the third. By the fourth log, there was activity. People in Riverside Estates, polo shirts running around, someone with a radio. I saw Diane Pritchard emerge from the main tent, saw her face even from a distance. She froze, stared at the log floating past. Her mouth opened, and then she screamed. Not words, just a raw, defeated scream that carried across the water, the sound of someone realizing they'd lost. It was the most satisfying sound I'd heard in 3 years. The logs kept coming, one every 2 to 3 minutes, floating peacefully down the river, exactly as my great-grandfather's logs had done in 1912, following the current, completely legal, completely protected under the easement. By log number 7, people were leaving, walking back to their cars. A few were taking pictures, probably planning to complain on social media. The violin music had stopped. The white tents were emptying out. Log number 9 got partially stuck on a sandbar right in the middle of the viewing area. Eddie motored over, used a pike pole to free it, and it continued downstream. That's when the sheriff's deputy showed up. Same guy as before, Deputy Marsh. He stood on the bank with his hands on his hips, watching us. Tom kayaked over to him. I saw them talking. Tom showed him paperwork. The deputy looked at it, looked at us, shook his head, and smiled. Actually smiled. Then walked back toward the parking lot. We finished launching all 15 logs by 11:15. They floated through the park area and continued downstream, where Frank and Amy's daughter would be waiting to retrieve them at a designated pullout point. Everything according to plan, everything legal, everything documented. I motored the boat back to my dock. Eddie and his boys were laughing so hard they could barely breathe. Tom paddled over in his kayak with a grin that probably hurt his face. They called the sheriff. They called the county commissioner. They called their attorney. Nobody can do anything because you're exercising a legal easement. The deputy told Diane to file a civil complaint if she has an issue, and she screamed at him that she already has a civil complaint and it's not working. Then he told her he'd watched his own family farm get harassed by HOAs for years, and maybe she should have thought about easements before building a park on a working river. How many people left? At least half, maybe more. Their big fundraiser is basically over. I'd estimate they lost $6,000 or $7,000 in ticket revenue, plus whatever they would have made on plant sales and donations. Eddie's older boy was checking his phone. It's already on Facebook. Someone posted a video of the logs floating through with the caption, "Nature reclaims Riverside Estates," and it has like 300 shares already. We pulled the boat out of the water. I walked back to my cabin, grabbed beers from the cooler, and we sat on the porch drinking them in the late morning sun. From downstream, I could hear car engines starting, people leaving. The garden tour was done. My phone rang, Tom's office number. He answered, listened. His smile got even bigger. That was my paralegal. She just got a call from the HOA's attorney. They want to schedule an emergency settlement conference. Monday morning, they're ready to talk. Talk about what? Dropping everything, the lawsuit, the demands, all of it. They want this over. I sat back in my chair, took a long drink of my beer, looked out at the river where my great-grandfather had floated logs over a century ago, where my grandfather had taught me to fish, where I'd scattered Sarah's ashes because she'd loved this place in the old photographs I'd shown her. Tell them I'll think about it. The settlement conference was Monday at 9 a.m. at Tom's office, not theirs. They wanted neutral ground, Tom said. They were scared. Diane Pritchard showed up with her attorney and 2 board members. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in a month. No fake smile, no expensive pants, just tired eyes and the look of someone who knew they'd lost. Tom had prepared a settlement offer. It was beautiful. 1, Riverside Estates HOA would issue a written acknowledgement that my property was not, had never been, and would never be part of their association. This acknowledgement would be recorded with the county. 2, they would withdraw all claims, all liens, all demands for payment, everything. 3, they would pay my attorney's fees, all of them. Tom had billed almost $20,000. They would pay every penny. 4, they would make a public statement to their membership acknowledging that they had incorrectly identified my property as part of the HOA and apologizing for any inconvenience. 5, Diane Pritchard would resign as president immediately. 6, the HOA would conduct an independent financial audit and make the results public to all members. 7, they would pay me $25,000 in damages for emotional distress and harassment. 8, if they ever contacted me again for any reason other than necessary legal communication, I would have the right to resume legal action, and they would be liable for additional damages. Tom slid the settlement offer across the conference table. This is our offer. Take it or leave it. If you leave it, we go to trial, and I will bury you. I will call every property owner you've ever threatened. I will put your financial records on display. I will have your former board members testify that they had no idea what you were spending money on. I will make sure every newspaper in the county covers this case. Take the deal. Their attorney read it, whispered to Diane. She looked at me. Really looked at me for the first time since this all started. Why are you doing this? Is it just about the money? I leaned forward, kept my voice steady. You threatened to take my land, the land where my wife wanted to grow old with me. We had 48 years together and she died 3 years ago from cancer. I bought this property with the last money we'd saved so I could feel close to her again. I scattered her ashes in that river because she loved this place. And you... I pointed at her. You tried to take it from me with a fraudulent demand letter because you thought I was too old or too stupid to fight back. This isn't about money. This is about making sure you never do to anyone else what you tried to do to me. Silence. One of the board members was crying. Diane's face had gone pale. She looked down at her hands. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Truly. I thought we were protecting property values. I thought we were doing the right thing for the community. I didn't think about... She stopped, looked up at me. I'm sorry about your wife. I didn't say anything. Couldn't tell if she meant it or if it was just one last manipulation. Didn't matter. She'd learn to live with what she'd done. That was punishment enough. We accept, their attorney said quietly. They signed the settlement agreement right there. Tom notarized it. It was done. Diane stood to leave, then stopped. She looked back at me one more time, opened her mouth like she wanted to say something else, then thought better of it, and left. The check arrived 4 days later. Certified mail. $45,000. $20,000 for Tom, $25,000 for me. I deposited it and didn't think about it again. The public statement went out to all HOA members the next week. Diane resigned the day after that. The independent audit took 2 months, and when it was done, 3 board members also resigned. Turned out there was over $120,000 in missing funds spread across 3 years that had been paid to various contractors owned by board members or their families. The local paper did a story. Riverside Estates HOA in turmoil after settlement with property owner. It was satisfying to read, but I didn't keep the clipping. Didn't need to. Summer came. I finished the repairs on the cabin, put in new windows, built a proper front porch with a roof and screens to keep the bugs out, planted a garden where Sarah always wanted one, tomatoes, beans, flowers she'd loved, marigolds and zinnias, the kind that would have made her smile. The goats stayed. Hank mellowed out a little, though he'd still try to headbutt you if you weren't paying attention. They kept the brush down, and I'd gotten used to them. In a weird way, they were company. People from the HOA left me alone. Completely alone. I'd see cars drive past my driveway, sometimes slow down, but nobody stopped. Nobody bothered me. A few neighbors, not HOA members, just people who lived in the area, stopped by to introduce themselves. Brought me pie or offered to help with the property. Word had spread about what happened, and I think some folks respected that I'd stood up to the HOA. One afternoon in July, a man probably in his 60s knocked on my door, said his name was Robert Chen, said his family had been one of the ones the HOA tried to shake down 5 years ago, and they'd paid $3,000 just to make it stop. I wish I'd fought them like you did, he said. Seen what you did, the logs, the settlement, It made me realize we didn't have to take it. My wife and I are filing to get our money back. Thank you. I didn't know what to say to that. Just shook his hand. 2 weeks later, another couple stopped by, the Hendersons. Same story. They'd paid the HOA $2,500 4 years ago to avoid a fight. Now they were fighting. Then the Mallory family, the ones Tom had helped years ago, drove over just to say they'd heard what I'd done and wanted to shake my hand. I hadn't been trying to help anyone except myself. But maybe that was enough. Maybe standing up for yourself, especially when you're old and tired and just want to be left alone. Maybe that helps other people find the courage to do the same. The river was beautiful that summer. I fished every morning just like I'd planned, caught bass and crappie and threw most of them back. Sat on the dock in the evenings with a beer and watched the sunset paint the water orange and pink and purple. I talked to Sarah out loud, told her about my day, about the fish I caught, about how the garden was growing, told her about the fight with the HOA and how I'd won. I didn't know if she could hear me, didn't know if there was anything after this life. But it made me feel better to say the words out loud. We got our place, I told her one night. It's ours. Nobody can take it. I wish you were here to see it. The stars were out. Millions of them, the way you can only see when you're far from city lights. She would have loved it. Fall came. The leaves turned colors. I stacked firewood for winter. The goats got thicker coats. Life settled into a rhythm. Wake with the sun, work on the property, fish, read, sleep. Simple, quiet, the kind of peace I'd been looking for when I bought this place. One morning in October, I was working on the dock, replacing another board that had rotted, when I heard a vehicle coming up the driveway. I looked up. It was Deputy Marsh in his cruiser. My first thought was that something was wrong, but he was smiling when he got out. Morning, just checking in. Haven't gotten any calls about goats or logs or anything else lately. Figured that was a good sign. I haven't needed to exercise my easement rights in a while. He laughed. Good. For what it's worth, you did something good. That HOA was a problem for years. They're under new management now, and from what I hear, they're actually following the law. You helped more people than you know. After he left, I sat on the porch and thought about that. I hadn't been trying to help anyone except myself. But if Robert Chen and the Hendersons and others like them felt a little bit safer in their homes because of what I'd done, then maybe it meant something. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like an old man who got lucky, who had a good lawyer and enough stubbornness to see it through. But if standing my ground helped other people stand theirs, then maybe Sarah would have approved after all. It's been almost 2 years since all of this started, since Diane Pritchard showed up with her wicker basket and her fake smile, since that first threat letter, since I bought 6 goats and learned what malicious compliance really means. I'm 77 now. My knees still hurt. My back still goes out. I still miss Sarah every single day. And there are mornings when I wake up and the grief is so heavy, I can barely breathe. But I'm here, in this place, on this land, where my great-grandfather floated logs, and my grandfather taught me to fish, and my father taught me that some things are worth fighting for. The HOA tried to tidy up my memories with their rules and their property, values, and their perfect lawns. They tried to take the last place where I could feel connected to my family, to my history, to my wife. They thought I was just an old man who'd roll over and die quietly. They were wrong. Here's what I learned. When you've lost everything that matters, when you've watched the person you love most in the world slip away and there's nothing you can do to stop it, when you've sold the home where you raised your children and moved to the one place that still feels like peace, when you've lost all of that, you've got nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous man in the world. Not dangerous in a violent way, not dangerous in a destructive way. Dangerous because he's willing to fight, because he's willing to stand his ground, because he knows that the worst thing that can happen to him already happened, and everything else is just noise. They thought they could intimidate me with legal threats and official-looking letters and talk about foreclosure. But I'd already survived the worst thing a person can survive. I'd already held my wife's hand while she took her last breath. I'd already packed up 48 years of memories into boxes and walked away from the life we'd built together. A threat to take my land, that was nothing. That was just paper. That was just people who'd never known real loss trying to scare someone who'd already been through hell. So I fought back. Not with violence, not with anger, with the law, with patience, with 6 goats and 15 logs and a century-old easement that predated their pretty little park by 3 generations. And I won, not because I'm special, not because I'm brave, because I knew something they didn't. Old men who've buried their wives don't scare easy. Old men who've lost everything know that property isn't worth as much as they think it is. And old men who've been farmers and soldiers and workers and fathers and husbands know how to be patient, how to plan, how to wait for the right moment to strike. They wanted to tidy up my memories, wanted to smooth over my rough edges, wanted to turn my family's land into another sterile lot in their perfect little subdivision. Turns out some things are older than pretty lawns. Some things run deeper than property values. Some things, like a grandfather's fishing lessons and a father's teachings and a wife's final wish to find peace by the river, some things can't be tidied away with rules and regulations and homeowners association covenants. I'm sitting on my porch right now, same as I do most evenings. The sun's going down, the river's flowing past like it has for thousands of years, like it will for thousands more. The goats are settled in their paddock. There's a beer in my hand and Sarah's memory in my heart. This land is mine. This peace is mine. This sunset is mine. And nobody, not an HOA, not a committee, not all the perfect lawns and white tents in the world, nobody can take it from me. Never tell an old man his land is worthless. He remembers when it meant everything, and he remembers how to make it matter again. This is what happens when you threaten someone who's got nothing left to lose, when you come for an old man's peace, for his memories, for the last place he can feel close to the wife he buried. You learn a lesson that young folks in expensive cars with their clipboards and bylaws never learned. Respect your elders, especially the ones who've survived loss, especially the ones who know how to fight. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been threatened by people who thought you were too old or too tired or too poor to fight back, hit that like button. Share this video. Let people know that it's never too late to stand your ground. And if you're facing something similar, if there's a committee or a corporation or some bureaucrat trying to take what's yours, remember this. The law is powerful when you know how to use it. Patience is powerful when you know how to wait. And an old man with a good attorney and 6 goats can move mountains, or at least ruin a garden tour. This is Grandpa Revenge. Never let them tidy your memories away.